Hey, how you doing? This is Adam Post, publisher of more than 1,000 independent comics, publisher of College of the Dead, creator of Chromium Man and the Triumphant Comics universe. Hey, woke DC is dead. I guarantee you, woke DC has had its day. You know they canceled Batgirl. They canceled a few other things. It's not just canceling Batgirl. There's more to it. It's in their announcements. If you read between the lines, I'm going to tell you what's in there between the lines. Before we do, we're going to get that article. Go ahead and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Click the bell for notifications and give me a like if you like the video. All right, on to the article in today's Hollywood Reporter. And I'm going to tell you exactly what to look for. So here's what they announced. DC will have a 10-year plan akin to Marvel's Playbook. When they say they're going to have a 10-year plan akin to Marvel's Playbook, they mean they've laid out over what they think they're going to do in 10 years, what they have to do year after year to establish independent characters with each of their own independent following that they can then consolidate with a crossover book. Or crossover film. So why now? What are they doing? Why does this mean that you can't have a woke character? Well, take a look. You can have a woke character, here or there. It's not about having a woke character. It's about, are you going to have something that puts politics and puts the idea of having people that look like this or look like that or outward appearances instead of having good story. Let's take a quick look at the reference of Marvel Phase 1. First they did Iron Man, then Incredible Hulk. Not a great movie, but I'm glad they did it. Then Iron Man 2, then Thor, then Captain America, and then finally the Avengers. So they established 5 independent films and then a group film, the Avengers. The Avengers was hugely successful, and they built momentum. It's like a flywheel. You turn it slowly, you turn it again, you turn it again, and you turn it again. The speed of the turning is what captures the energy and builds the momentum. As we just saw with Doctor Strange, which up to now has done literally $952 million, which is ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. It's an okay movie. There's nothing phenomenal about it. Spider-Man is not in that movie to help the movie do so well. Why is it doing so well? It's doing so well because they turn the Marvel flywheel in the cinematic universe very well. They keep putting out movies that relate to the overall continuity. Now, they have had some dopey movies. They stuck Captain Marvel in the middle of 2 Avengers films to try to push her out and use the power of Marvel to inject some of these projects. You can do that, but you're not going to do that when you're building something that's going to build momentum and have success over time. The Warner Brothers Discovery executive also addressed scrapping Batgirl. Our job is to protect the DC brand. When he says the DC brand, what is he talking about? I've done a lot of research on David Zaslav. I thought the deal to merge Discovery with Warner Media was very interesting. I will tell you this just quickly about my research about David Zaslav. When he speaks about brands, and you and I talk about brands, he means it more than the average person does. He doesn't mean like, well, I want Batman to look like Batman. When he says he wants a brand to be protected, he explains this is pre-merger. He's talking about the freaking Food Network. He's talking about his ID channels. He explains his audience members need to be interested in the intellectual property, but they have to feel nourished by the content. Literally used the word nourished in a few of these interviews. You can see them on YouTube. Just Google his name and look for YouTube videos where he's done these long industry interview conversations. He talks about his concept of branding. By the way, the man knows business too. He's been very successful, and he helped launch CNBC, the current network. He's done a lot of stuff. That said, he knows how to protect a brand. And when he says the B word, brand, he knows what he means when he says brand. Nourishing. Never heard that term before. That says it really well. So just 2 days after Warner Brothers Discovery made the stunning move to cancel the HBO Max film Batgirl, an unapologetic CEO David Zaslav sought to reassure Wall Street there is a cohesive plan for the future of DC. You understand now why he can't just have some half-assed, woke-ishy, weird thing happening with one of his brands. because he will not build momentum. Because, yes, he can get a tax write-off for the film. Now, they can still show that they can get the full tax write-off if they spend, whatever, $100 to $140 million making Batgirl. You can still get the tax advantage even if they stick it eventually on one of their outlets, whether it's the streaming service, whatever, or they have a limited theatrical release. A loss is a loss is a loss. If they say it's not capable for distribution, they can write off the expense to do that. But that said, here's what his quote is. You look at Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, Aquaman. These are brands that are known everywhere in the world, Zaslav said during an earnings call Thursday. Quote, we've done a reset. We've restructured the business where we are going to focus, where there's going to be a team with a 10-year plan focusing on just DC. We believe we can build a much more sustainable business. When he means sustainable business, he means this. He means you release the first film. The first film does a few $100 million or $1 billion. Then you release the second film, all the while letting people know that there's a real universe. And when we say universe, there's a crossover between characters. I mentioned earlier I published the Triumphant Comics universe. Continuity matters. Story matters. It's not just not having inclusion, or not having, inclusion for inclusion's sake. It's not a matter of not having brands that nourish the consumer and the audience. It's about knowing when things take place in your world, and it's about that being an actual shared world that really exists. And it also is about feeding that ongoing story, because the story for Iron Man relates, for example, Marvel Phase 1, to the story of the Hulk, which of course, Iron Man 2 is a callback to Iron Man. Thor is involved. The Avengers are there in the background. They're starting to build out Nick Fury's character. They're starting to explain and demonstrate and evolve what the world is and how it works. But there is an ongoing story. Dates and times actually matter. Characters learning and changing actually matter. And characters, interacting and then ultimately interacting in a group project matter a lot. You would say, hey, if DC is serious about it, this is what they have to do. They have to do single character projects. They have to make sure that the character is, you're focused on the story. They need to know what that small story for that one character, and again, he could be saving the universe. They all seem to save the universe. That's fine. That's not what I mean by small story. I mean small story related specifically to that character and how that relates in the universe to the overall story of the universe. It gets a little complicated, but that said, there's absolutely no way that you can have a one-off wacky version of Batman or Batgirl, or you can make Aquaman a woman in one of the movies. You can't do that because that separate story would decimate and mess up all the other stories. You can have a one-off like Joker if you explain it's not part of the DC universe. And at the same time, you're very strict and very consistent and very coherent with what you're doing with the ongoing DC universe. So all these things are possible. They seem really serious about doing it. DC has long wished to emulate the success of the Disney-owned Marvel Studios. Well, I mean, why wouldn't they? Which Kevin Feige has built into the largest, highest-grossing film franchise in history. This is true. Zaslav recently brought Feige's former boss, retired Disney film chief Alan Horn, on as an advisor. During the earnings call, Zaslav suggested DC would try to emulate the Marvel Playbook. DC proceeded in stops and starts following the conclusion of Christopher Nolan's defining Dark Knight trilogy concluded a decade ago. The studio initially tapped Zack Snyder to oversee its planned universe, which the filmmaker launched in 2013 with Man of Steel. However, Snyder lost the confidence of the studio executives after the divisive 2016 Batman vs. Superman Dawn of Justice and some of the films in an ambitious 10-project slate announced in 2014 never came to fruition, including Justice League 2. Executive Walter Hamada took the reins of DC Films in 2018 and has been plotting out a number of films, including several for HBO Max, to meet the mandate of then Warner Media Jason Kilar, who was an amazing guy. Jason Kilar actually was the founder of Hulu. That's a big deal. He kind of started streaming. So, okay, that's a big deal. Wasn't enough to make HBO Max successful, though. Now those plans are changing once again. And by the way, that's what you do. You make a plan. If it works, that's fantastic. You still have to evolve as it goes. But if your assumptions don't play out, of course you're going to change it. But what you're not going to change is the fundamentals. You can't change the brand of the character. The character is who the character is. You can't change the fact that it needs to be a solid story. And you can't change the fact that that story has to make sense in continuity. So that if something happens last year, it's got to be relevant this year. This year follows last year, just like in your life, just like in my life. We don't get to just make up a new year every year. And because, time moves on. And when people see that in story, when people see that across a universe of whether it's comics or films, they appreciate that. It's extra value that they get from it, and you really can't get much of it. It's not done in comic books, for example, anymore, and it's terrible that it's not done. I'm going to do it. You'll see I have upcoming plans. We are very excited about them. We've seen them. We think they're terrific. Okay, so he's referencing a number of DC films coming up, including Black Adam, Shazam, Fury of the Gods. Now, those films, they're going to get fixed, depending on where they are in production, so that they fit this larger plan. There's absolutely no way that there's a Batgirl hiding in there somewhere. They're going to just be good. And they're going to share a common aesthetic. And that's probably another problem with the Zack Snyder universe is it being like dark stuff. You can't just do all dark stuff and have that be the universe. You can have a character who's a dark character. Punisher can have his own film and his own brand, and that's fine. Is part of a larger story. You can do that movie. Even that is a little iffy because of he's such an anti-hero. However, you can do it with that character, but you can't do a dark Superman or a dark Batman and endlessly dark characters that aren't going to be massively relatable and appropriate for children. At that point, if you're doing that, it's not going to be a major franchise, and obviously that's DC wants a major franchise. Miller was also accused of... Okay, this is Ezra Miller. Miller was accused of doing a lot of screwy stuff. Ezra Miller, that'll play its way out. I don't know what's going to happen with that guy. He seems to do some strange stuff. Okay, finally wrapping up. Zaslav's comments come at a fraught time for DC. On Tuesday, Warner announced the news that it was shelving the $90 million to $140 million Batgirl movie, which was deep in post-production ahead of a planned HBO Max release. I did a couple of videos about that already. Blue Beetle, will that happen? The important thing to think about is, number one, the guy who writes the checks, the guy who owns this thing and runs it, Zaslav, does he understand what he means by the word brand? And the answer is yes. He understands brand better than most. He knows that a brand has to nourish the consumer, that they're going to that brand because they want to feel good. So it's more than it just being consistent with the previous exploitation and representation of the brand. It's about moving the needle with that individual and giving people the promise that a brand is supposed to be. A brand is a promise. Okay? So yes, Zaslav understands that. Secondly, do they want to do a cinematic universe? Well, they do. Why wouldn't they? Because if you can take Doctor Strange and turn Doctor Strange into a $950 million project, partially because of the continuity references to the overall Marvel Universe, partially to the continuity references to the Disney Plus TV series, partially to the continuity reference of Doctor Strange previously being in the last Spider-Man film, why would they not want to do that? Of course they want to do it. So they got Alan Horn. He's a very capable guy, Horn. Can he do it? I don't know. Walter Hamada is probably not going to be doing it, because as this other article says, and I'll put a link to this in the description, but we're not going to cover it a lot, Walter Hamada was about to quit because he's so sad because Batman got canceled. Batgirl got canceled. What happens is creatives get very upset, people that have been working on the film, and it gives the studio a bad reputation. Well, it changes and adjusts the reputation of the studio. It puts the priorities on the studio. And another thing about what's going to be happening with Warner Brothers Discovery, They lost a lot of money this financial quarter. The projections that were made for Warner Media were way off from AT&T, and they're now projecting they're going to make $2 billion less in cash, free cash, EBITDA, free cash that they use to pay their bills with. Let's put it that way. That's EBITDA. $2 billion less next year. Now, they were only going to make probably about, again, this is off the top of my head, $2 billion was a big chunk of what they expected to make with the combined companies. It wasn't going to be higher than $4 billion. It may have been as little as $3 billion. When they took on Warner Media, they took on another, I think, approximately $10 billion in debt, which actually wasn't very much considering what they got for it. But that debt's got to get paid. It's got to get paid. They have to make money. So the layoffs are going to happen. Woke DC is gone. Now, it's going to still probably be in the comics here and there until they get to the comics. But let me tell you, they are not going to screw up the DC universe for films. There's no way they can. They can't afford it. It's too big of a luxury. And Zaslav has already made it clear it's not going to happen. All right, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please do give it a like. Subscribe to the channel. Click the bell for notifications. And I will see you again soon with another video and more updates on what I'm working on for my comics projects. You're going to like it. And if I don't see you, I will miss you.